This is part 2 of my video series about Cuba. In part 1 we looked at the map. Cuba sits between the Windward Passage and the Florida Straits. To the north is Miami, to the south is Panama, to the east is the Cayman Islands, to the west is the Virgin Islands. Cuba sits in the middle of the offshore network. We also looked at the solar paradox. Cuba is one of the sunniest locations on the planet. Putting solar panels on just 1% of the land in Cuba would generate 68 times more electricity than the entire nation needs. And we looked at GESA, the military operation in control of the Cuban economy. Their version of socialism is not to have free, sovereign, solar-powered energy for Cubans, but they're the only country on the planet that has a subsidized hotel industry. And in 15 years, they've spent over $24 billion of Cuban taxpayer money on hotels. For contrast, they've only spent $1.75 billion on the entire public health service for the island. The historical context is colonial, of course. Every colonial project in history has had to bribe enough locals to turn on their own and run the extraction riot for them. I ended part 1 with one sentence that was forced at gunpoint into the Cuban Constitution. The government of Cuba consents that the United States may exercise the right to intervene in the preservation of Cuban independence, the maintenance of a government adequate for the protection of life, property, and individual liberty. So today we're going to find out what that sentence actually means. Specifically, what property? Whose property? Who wrote that word, property? Who paid him? And who was sitting on the land when he wrote it? Because property and liberty are not neutral words. This is the original document, and you get that document from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Look at how this is worded on their website. The Platt Amendment was a treaty between the US and Cuba that attempted to protect Cuba's independence from foreign intervention. How? By permitting extensive US involvement in Cuban domestic affairs for the enforcement of Cuban independence. That's incoherent. How can you enforce independence? Let's go back to 1899. Cuban landowners are bankrupt, their mills are in rubble, their debts are still on paper, and American investors are arriving with cash. This is Cuban historian Luis Perez. You will find this article at Duke University Press. The details are here.
Perez.
Perez. Anyway, okay, don't take me at pronunciation. His work shows how US military rule turned Cuba's ruined countryside into a cheap land market for foreign investors, while posing as the rescuers. He writes, farms were selling at 1/5 of their value. Land was put at $100 per caballeria when the real value was over 1,000. A caballeria is a unit of Spanish colonial measurement. It's about 33 acres. What Perez describes is paralleled in academic literature about enclosures. This is E.P. Thompson's book, Customs in Common. It says, the concept of exclusive property in land central to enclosure was carried across the Atlantic by British colonists, administrators, and lawyers. The legal technology of dispossession travels. Cuba, 1899, is the same mechanism as Ireland in 1847, as Bengal in 1770, and as the Highlands before that. First you create the conditions, then you let the economy crash, you wait, and then you buy everything. On JSTOR you will find Julius Pratt's 1934 paper, American Business and the Spanish-American War. This directly documents the J.P. Morgan involvement in Cuba land purchasing and finance. The source behind me here is Eric Toussaint, the French historian writing for the Committee of the Abolition of Illegitimate Debt. This piece is actually quite devastating to the official narrative. It traces the Paris negotiations, specifically showing how Washington refused to assume Cuba's Spanish debt. This was a deliberate move, but it was not debt forgiveness for Cubans. It wiped the slate clean to allow US capital to enter unencumbered. What you need to understand about the Spanish-American War is that the United States did not just arrive out of nowhere in 1899. They were there already, before. They had been buying Cuban land from the Spanish as early as the 1860s. By 1894, 90% of Cuba's exports were going to the United States. Washington already controlled the Cuban economy. All Spain was doing was holding a flag. This piece by the Mises Institute has the specific financial chain. What was happening in 1835 in Spain? 1835, N.M. Rothschild and Son, the London House, loaned the Spanish government 15 million francs. This is Daniel Weissweiler. Look what it says here. The most important Rothschild agent in the 1830s. Wow. He was the permanent Spanish government agent for all of Rothschild's houses. Interesting structural insight. Spain was a single client that the Rothschild managed centrally. 1837, Amstel von Rothschild, head of the Frankenfurt House, sends a 23-year-old German clerk to Cuba. This is August Schrumberg. Sorry about the German. He immediately anglicizes his name to Belmont. All of this information comes directly from the Rothschilds' own archives. But I hesitate to send people here because it's written by them, for them, in defense of their worldview. And I'm afraid that you might accidentally take any of it at face value because it's crap. What they say is that 15 million franc loan to Spain, every other Rothschild house had declined because they were pressured, apparently, by their respective governments not to support Spain's new liberal government under Queen Isabella. But Nathan sends somebody anyway. Why? I'm so sorry for this cliffhanger, but I am literally running out of platform time now. I will try and get part 3 recorded today. So go to it.